back in time. England, late 15th century, a country teetering between the collapse of one royal dynasty and the rise of another. Born into this whirlwind of political intrigue was Margaret Pole, a woman destined for her place as one of the most tragic figures in English history. Margaret was born in 1473, a Plantagenet by blood. Her father was George, the Duke of Clarence, brother to the two kings, Edward IV and Richard III. From the moment she came into the world, Margaret was enveloped in power and privilege. But that power was precarious because the Wars of the Roses had torn England asunder, pitting families against each other for control of the throne. And Margaret's family, her very name, became a symbol of both the height of royal authority and the ever-present danger of losing it. When she was just 5 years old, Margaret's father was executed by his brother, King Edward IV. A little over a decade earlier, her family had ruled England, but by that time, in just a few brief years, the Plantagenet dynasty had crumbled. Then, in 1485, Richard III was killed in the Battle of Bosworth. The Tudor dynasty seized power, and everything changed for Margaret. She found herself living in a world ruled by Henry VII, a world that no longer welcomed her royal bloodline. But Margaret was a survivor. She married Sir Richard Pole, a loyal nobleman under Henry VII, and for a time she seemed to escape the shadows of her family's turbulent past. She reared 5 children, managed her estates, and stayed clear of political games that had destroyed her family. Life was quiet until Henry VIII came into power, and Margaret's world was turned upside down once again. Margaret's tranquil life was about to be disrupted, not by anything she had done, but by her son. Her son, Reginald Pole, was a brilliant scholar who rose through the Catholic Church to cardinal. Reginald came to a fateful decision to cross King Henry VIII over his break with the Catholic Church. Henry, eager to divorce Catherine of Aragon and marry Anne Boleyn, proclaimed himself the supreme head of the Church of England. This, for many, was an act of defiance against the Pope, but for Reginald, it was heresy. He openly declared Henry with the label of a tyrant attached to him, thus challenging the kingly authority. Now put on the shoes of Margaret, a mother whose son has just antagonized the most powerful man in the kingdom. Consequences would be quick and fatal. Henry VIII was infuriated because of the betrayal by Reginald, which involved attacking Margaret and the whole family. In 1539, Margaret was arrested and charged with treason. The charges were trumped up flimsy, based not on anything Margaret had done, but on her son's rebellion and her Plantagenet blood. She was a threat to the Tudor crown, and that, for Henry, was enough. At 65, Margaret was being taken to the Tower of London, where so many political prisoners had already met their fates within the cold grey walls. Living 2 eternities, for a period of time she knew her fate was at Henry's mercy. Still and all, despite everything, Margaret refused to go under. She protested her innocence of the charges and would not buckle to the cruelty of the king. Her family suffered much also. Her son Geoffrey was put in prison, while others fled into exile. The name Margaret had become hazardous, one that represented opposition to the Tudor regime. Yet she held on, enduring her imprisonment with dignity, unaware that the worst hour was yet to come. The executioner's block awaited Margaret Pole, Countess of Salisbury, in May 1541. But this was no ordinary execution. Margaret, now 67 years old, frail but tall, refused to kneel before the block when the moment came. She refused to submit, even in her final moments. She had been stripped of her titles, her lands, and her freedom, but she would not be stripped of her dignity. What ensued was one of the most gruesome executions to have been carried out in the annals of English history. The inexperienced executioner could not complete the act cleanly. Several blows were needed to finish her life, truly ghastly exhibition of brutality. Her death was painful, slow, and quite horrifying. Margaret's last moments were not only a tragic end to her life, but a tragic end to the Plantagenet line itself. She was the last survivor of that brilliant court that once had ruled England. But Margaret's death had little to do with the expiration of a bloodline and everything to do with ruthless politicking. A grim reminder of what one got when one crossed a king like Henry VIII. Margaret was not beheaded because of some crime she had committed, but rather because her name and her heritage threatened others. She died a martyr for family, faith, and values dear to her heart. The life of Margaret Pole is filled with tragedies, but it tells an impacting story of resilience. Of a born woman into royalty, she is the one who spent her whole life seeing that very birthright place her in continuous danger. She stood firm through loss, imprisonment, and the threat of death. With bravery, she faced the ultimate injustice, and even in her very last moments, she stood defiant. Her story taught us that, no matter what life takes away from you, it can never take your dignity unless you allow it to. Margaret's strength in unimaginable suffering is to teach us all a lesson. Even when everything else falls apart, you can still choose to stand tall. Not because of royal lineage, her legacy lives on because of her spirit. Margaret Pole showed the world the true meaning of power. It does not lie in crowns and thrones, but in the heart that dares to stand in front of fate, never shaking. As we reflect on her life, let her story remind us that no matter the challenge, we too can find strength in ourselves. Like Margaret, we can choose to rise above, face our fears, and hold on to our beliefs even when the world tries to tear them down. Margaret Pole was from the last of her house, and her legacy of resilience and bravery will be remembered and passed on for generations to come. If this content drew you in and left you wanting more, show your support by liking, commenting, and subscribing. Your interaction helps us bring more incredible historical tales to life, and your engagement ensures that we keep uncovering the most intriguing and impactful moments from the past. Your comments spark new ideas, your likes fuel our creativity, and subscribing guarantees that you're part of every journey we take into history. Let's continue exploring the extraordinary stories that shaped our world together.